The New York Times put Jonathan Majors on the front cover on February 10, 2024. You have to ask the question, can anybody fight implicit bias, history, the justice system, and the media?
Really, if we look at history, shouldn't we be believing black men?
Long was 21 when detectives framed him, and he was sentenced to life in prison.
Words of a wrongly convicted judge in Florida posthumously exonerated 4 black men who spent more than 40 years in prison for 3 murders he did not commit. After being convicted in a triple murder that prosecutors now say he did not commit, 2 men convicted in connection with his killing were exonerated.
In Westchester County Court.
Marked by tears after a judge threw out the rape.
Really, if we look at history, shouldn't we be believing black men? I mean, haven't we learned any lessons of what happened?
So the New York Times put Jonathan Majors on the front cover of the paper, the front cover of the newspaper. And I'm going to do a few more deep dives on this story that just came out. What is really a one-sided story against him. That's actually pretty consistent with the history of these types of stories when a black man is involved. And I'm going to go through a deep dive of why I say that's the case. But first, let's do a bit of context here. 2 other cases involving black men, and they would be the cases of Adam Foss, who was acquitted in November of 2023.
To shift from trying to keep people out of jail as a defender, I'm trying to help kids stay out of jail because our kids are no different than the young people that are here.
And Kevin Porter, who is an NBA player.
Yeah, I've been paying more attention to when to score, what plays to run at several moments of the game, and when to slow the game down.
This is the attorney Priya Chaudhry talking about the Adam Foss case.
What we should be worried about under Alvin Bragg's office is this prosecutor tried to strike every black person from the jury. I raised so many Batson challenges, and the things she said about them just show that all they want is to try to get a conviction at all costs.
This was the plea deal that was offered to Adam Foss, who was acquitted, completely cleared and acquitted in November of 2023.
1, that he goes into court and he admits that he actually, right? All that achieves is making sure that Adam Foss cannot sue Alvin Bragg, which, by the way, he is doing. And 2, and this is terrifying, that he never showed the evidence to anyone. That he spent his whole life walking around saying it was dismissed, but I can never prove to you that I didn't do it. And 3, that he never, quote, changed the narrative. That he never say, I am innocent. And they would have dismissed the case entirely.
And now let's look at how the Manhattan DA's office handled the Kevin Porter case. He was an NBA star before this happened.
Kevin Porter Jr. was arrested at a Manhattan hotel for domestic assault, allegedly. Police say the Houston Rockets guard assaulted his girlfriend.
Kaiser Gonzalez was Kevin Porter's girlfriend.
Women who have been victims of domestic violence often recant. You're saying here that what they describe as taking place, none of that happened?
No, and I've never recanted a statement.
Kaiser Gonzalez had a lot to say, and I mean a lot, about the Manhattan DA's office.
The behavior and the actions of the district's attorney's office, they have compounded my trauma.
Specifically, Myra Kurzer, one of the DAs, one of the assistant DAs in the Manhattan DA's office.
The false narrative was publicized not only in a courtroom, but to the media as to what occurred.
And her mother, Kaiser Gonzalez's mother, calls the Manhattan DA's office,
contradicting to the narrative, the false narrative and accusations that they're putting out there.
Demanding to know who brought charges against Kevin Porter, because it wasn't my daughter. So what's going on here?
Because you weren't able to speak with her, who gave you authorization to what? To file the complaint on behalf of whom?
We are legally required to file a complaint within a certain amount of hours.
On behalf of whom?
This is why.
On behalf of
whom?
And I'm asking you a question. On behalf of whom?
On behalf of the people of the state of New York. This is the job that we do.
She cultivated her own narrative to make some type of false information to make stick to support the charges that she was bringing against Mr. Porter. For evidence and allegations that have been reported are false and misleading.
And so what ends up happening with Kevin Porter is that he takes a plea deal. Very interesting statement that came out from his attorney. The resolution will allow Mr. Porter to put this incident, which involved false felony allegation and false facts, behind him with no criminal record and move forward. That was his lawyer, Philip Job, and Stephanie Kellerman. Interesting statement there. Is someone filing a bar complaint, by the way, in Manhattan against some of these assistant district attorneys? Because this sounds irregular, but I'll check with my attorney friends to see if I'm right about that. Seems to be an interesting pattern that we're seeing in the Manhattan DA's office. You figure if you're seeing that pattern with Adam Foss and Kevin Porter, why wouldn't you have seen it with Jonathan Majors? These three cases happened at about the same time. And so to recap, you have Adam Foss, who is now preparing to sue Alvin Bragg's office, the Manhattan DA's office. You have Kaiser Gondasak, who was all over the place complaining about the Manhattan DA's office. And now you've got Jonathan Majors. And what happened on the 8th of February, 2024? We see that there's a team forming, although that team had probably, of course, already formed months before, with regard to the press and the prosecutors in Alvin Bragg's office. Of course, it's not new that prosecutors leak things to reporters and that the cops leak information to reporters. In fact, DOJ is classic in doing this. It's not the first time anybody's leaked something to reporters, but it is kind of interesting to read the New York Times piece of February 8, 2024, and see effectively the New York Times saying right in front of everybody's face that, yeah, we got this information from the DA's office, because there's no place else they could have gotten it. Now, there's, of course, the possibility they could have gotten it to the folks they talked to who were sources in the story. There were two of Jonathan Majors' ex-girlfriends in the story. Maybe they gave it to the New York Times. But one particular paragraph stands out. The Times obtained the statements before the trial. The interactions they describe were subsequently confirmed to the Times by multiple friends of the women. So in other words, the Times is saying, yeah, even though we got this from what is probably the Manhattan DA's office, they're arguing, well, we did do our own independent investigation. We're not just believing the Manhattan DA's office. Well, let's understand something. Because New York and LA are so full of celebrities, reporters have to build relationships with prosecutors. When something goes on, they need those sources to report a story. So there's often a very close relationship between the media and, in this case, the government, a prosecutor's office, in this type of a story. And you got to love that paragraph in the story on February 8 in the New York Times, where you have the Majors case and you have a Molyneux explanation, and then you have the case lumped in with Bill Cosby and Harvey Weinstein. Wow. Are we really trying to put the John Majors case on the same level of Bill Cosby and Harvey Weinstein? And remember that the Majors case is a misdemeanor assault case. I will give the Times some credit. At least they use the word misdemeanor, because a lot of the stories after the Times story, it somehow magically left that word out. But it's interesting because basically what it does is it tries the case in the court of public opinion. And media loves it because, of course, the media gets the clicks, they get the view counts, they get the Pulitzers, they get the books, they get the media appearances. Everybody wins. It's amazing. Except, of course, the person who's accused and may be accused falsely. This is why it's interesting to think about the fact that the DA's office apparently, and I guess the New York Times, thinks that what happened in court with regard to Majors wasn't enough, because now we're talking about every single relationship he's ever had in his life, even conversations on set with people. And the Times piece appears to refer to a conversation on set as abuse. That's one of the people. So the word abuse keeps coming up without a hell of a lot of definition attached to it. But again, it's interesting in itself that apparently the Manhattan DA's office isn't too confident about what they presented in court, because if they were confident about what they presented in court, we wouldn't see all this PR outside of court that can't be adjudicated, that can't have any cross-questioning or examination. The media doesn't do that. And it is interesting to think about having somebody in the story that claimed that the big Jonathan Majors intimidated me and I'm only 5'3", when you think about the fact that Hollywood is so loaded with stories of things that go on set, that some of which has been reported and some of which it hasn't. But if we're defining that as abuse, then one has to wonder where the New York Times has been all these years on this subject matter, because there's a lot of things that go on, as everybody, I think, understands, on these Hollywood sets. So many of these stories from these media outlets, they don't want really to tell you about the facts of the case that may in fact benefit Mr. Majors. Things like Grace Jabbari was arrested.
Grace? Hi, Grace.
Grace? Do you have a comment, Grace? Grace?
Hi, Grace.
Grace? Do you have a comment, Grace?
She was arrested for assault on Mr. Majors, and nobody is reporting that on any regular basis. I also found it interesting to read the piece and find that the word misdemeanor is missing in almost every piece that was an update to the New York Times story on February 8, 2024. I can assure you that if it was felony assault, it would say felony assault. But the word misdemeanor, of course, is missing, which is just typical narrative games. Instead of just reporting all the facts of the case, no matter who they may be good or bad for, what you see is everything that is reported is what the Manhattan DA's office would write in a story. So you can see that the media has picked a side. It's very obvious that that side is the side of Ms. Jabbari. This has been going on for months and months and months. And so it never surprises me to see certain facts left out, but there are some facts of the case that are so obvious, and the fact that they're always left out is just such a clear indicator of why the media cannot be trusted to just give us the facts of a piece. Again, what you saw with the Johnny Depp Amber Heard was, thank goodness, the public got to see the case for themselves with their own eyes, without the filter. Because that filter is always leaving facts out and always wanting a narrative to pick a side for somebody. I never thought I would hear these words come out of my mouth, but increasingly I'm actually feeling like the less media we have, the better. Because what's happening is, because the goal is clicks, the media quality is getting lower and lower and lower, because everybody's rushing to duplicate what they see on Twitter or other social media. They're not checking facts. They're throwing stuff up. It's very general. It's not very specific. And in an age of deliberate misinfo and disinfo, where people are deliberately trying to deceive people, this is a bad trait to have, to not do a deep dive, to not check, to not read, and to not put all the facts on the table. Very safe to say there's several people on YouTube who do way deeper dives on this story than anybody in so-called legacy media or mainstream media.
And today, jurors have begun reaching out on social media stating the accuser had no case, and that Adam Foss's work and life were severely undermined by an unstable woman who retaliated after her breakup.
If you want somebody reading the motions, you can go to Kat. If you want somebody talking about the legal aspects, you can go to Danny. If you want somebody to talk about the entertainment aspects, you can go to Chillmonger. There are so many people online right now. Attorneys, people who are just talking about the case. And they're doing way deeper dives and way better analysis than any of these reporters that I saw sitting in that courtroom. Don't get me wrong, there are a few good reporters in that courtroom. I still say Associated Press usually does come out on top as just being just the facts and not getting into opinion and narrative and editorializing. There were a few others as well, but for the most part, these entertainment reporters, they are a trip, absolute trip. And the New York Times is clearly on the side of anything that women say. It doesn't matter what the facts are. I think we're entering a realm right now of facts not mattering. Everybody wants their narrative and their story to be what they want it to be, regardless of what the facts are. And I think the John Majors case has become a perfect example of that.